Hola clase, hoy vamos a hacer comparisons. Es un poco complicado. The only reason it can be a little bit difficult is if you're lacking the vocabulary. But it's not the most difficult lesson we'll do, and hopefully I'll be able to break it down for you. So now we'll be able to compare people in Spanish, right? So speakers use comparisons to communicate that two or more persons or things have the same characteristic, and they want to indicate which person or thing has more or less of the characteristic, or if they possess it equally. In Spanish, it is possible to compare adjectives, adverbs, nouns, and verbs. So, for example, it would be like me saying, I am smarter than my sister. My brother is smarter than I am. I am smarter than everybody, right? So we're being able to tell who's taller, who's shorter, who's smarter, and those kind of things. So there's a whole bunch of different ways to do this in Spanish. And you guys have your cheat sheet with you. Some parts of it that I have on here, I've added extra just to be able to explain it to you, so you might not see it on that sheet. So in order to express differences between people, things, and actions, follow these patterns. When pointing out that a person or thing has more or less of a characteristic than another person or thing, or in explaining a difference in a way in which an action is carried out, you use the formula más slash menos plus adjective adverb plus K. And so I broke it down in those two separate ones. So más adjective K and menos adjective K. And just so that you can see what that means, right? Más alto que would be taller than. Más bajo que, shorter than. And so this is where it's a little bit confusing. I'm sure you guys have seen the word K before with an accent mark, and it means what? K without an accent mark and in this context means than. So this is where things can get a little bit confusing because words that you thought you knew meant something can mean something different in a different context. Más listo que, smarter than. Más pequeño que, smaller than. Más alto que, taller than. Oh, I guess I have a whole bunch of the same examples, but you guys can see the gist of it. So I did also a couple for menos adjective que, menos rápido que. So you wouldn't say less slower than in this context. You would just say slower than. Menos complicado que, less complicated than. Menos inteligente que, less intelligent than. I mean, you probably could say stupider, but that's probably not a word that you would want to use. But that's up to you. So in order to express difference between people, these are the examples that you guys have on your cheat sheet. So, mi mochila es más pequeña que la mochila de Juan. So can you translate this sentence? I changed a lot of the examples that were in the book to vocabulary that you'd be more familiar with. So my backpack is smaller than Juan's backpack. So you have the más que, and in between the más que you have pequeña, right? So you always put the adjective in between the más que or menos que. Mi coche es menos rápido que este coche. My car is slower than this car, right? So again, you have the adjective in between menos que. When stating that two actions are unequal in some way, use the formula verb plus más menos que. So in this context, right, you don't have the adjective in between más and que. You have a verb, then you use más or menos, more or less, and then you use que. So el libro de historia cuesta más que el libro de español. The history book cost more than the Spanish book. Right? So in this context, right, we had the verb cost more than. Cuesta más que. And you can do the same thing with menos. Limpias menos que yo porque tu casa es más pequeña. You clean less than me because your house is smaller. When you wish to communicate that nouns are not equal, use the following formula: más menos plus noun plus que. En aquella clase hay menos estudiantes que en mi clase. So note that estudiantes and que is attached and it shouldn't be, it should be separate. But what this means, right, in that class there are less students than in my class, right? So you can do the same formula when the noun comes afterwards. Right now you're putting the noun in between más and que. So menos estudiantes que. Más gatos que. Más clases que. More classes than. La clase de inglés tiene más chicos que la otra clase. The English class has more boys than the other class. So note that when expressing comparisons that include a quantity or specific number, they don't use que, they use they. So if you're specifically talking about a number, you have to say más de or menos de. Mi clase tiene más de 50 estudiantes. My class has more than 50 students. Hay menos de 10 chicas en mi clase. There are less than 10 girls in my class. So again, when using a number or trying to quantify something, you have to use más de or menos de. You don't use más que 50 estudiantes, because then you would be saying more than 50 students, right? And they use de. So this is also where it's confusing, because you probably know de as from, right? And in this context, it means than. There are a few irregular patterns when comparing the inequality of certain adjectives for age. They don't say, yo tengo más años que Elena, right? So they use mayor que for older than, menor que for younger than. The idea better than and worse than are expressed with the words mejor and peor. Okay, so mis abuelos son mayores que los abuelos de mi esposo. So these are just irregular patterns. So in this context, my grandparents are older than my husband's parents. Mi hermano es mayor que yo. My brother is older than me. Tu hijo es menor que el hijo de Sarah. Your son is younger than Sarah's son. So again, when you're talking about age, mayor que is older and menor que is younger. Más ejemplos. Tú duermes mejor que nosotros porque tu cama es mejor que nuestra cama. Right, so back up here in our notes, we said that ideas better than and worse than are expressed with mejor and peor. So mejor que, you sleep better than us because your bed is better than ours. Right, so you use the expression mejor que, and peor que means worse than. El barrio de ellos está peor que antes. Their neighborhood is worse than before. Okay, so to express older than, mayor que. Younger than, menor que. Better than, mejor que. And worse than, peor que. So a lot of it is studying vocabulary, and it makes it a lot easier when you're able to do that. If not, it can seem even more confusing. So when you're expressing similarities, right, between people, things, and actions, you use these patterns. In order to express that a person or thing has as much of a characteristic as another person or thing, they follow a different formula. So they use tan, which means as, or as much as, adjective plus como. So mi pelo es tan largo como mi hermana. My hair is as long as my sister's. And largo has to agree with pelo, right? Because that's your subject, so you have to make sure your adjective agrees with that. Mi hermana es tan inteligente como mi hermano. So my sister is as intelligent as my brother. So again, como, you've seen before in a question word, ¿cómo estás? How are you? ¿Cómo te llamas? How do you call yourself? In this context, without the accent mark, it means as. In other contexts, it can mean like, right? So this is where sometimes Spanish can get un poco complicado. But again, the more you expose yourself to it, the easier it'll be. So when mentioning the equality of two actions, use the formula verb plus tanto como. So this is when I run as fast as my brother, right? Ella camina tanto como nosotros. She walks as much as us. Yo uso el balcón tanto como mis padres. I use the balcony as much as my parents. So there's a couple of different examples, just 5 that you guys have in your list. Again, it really comes down to knowing your vocabulario. So you need to know what menos, tantos, más, and so on mean in order to understand the context better of the sentence. So go ahead and take a second to do these, and yo voy a darte las respuestas después, y vamos a ver. So, Raúl es hijo único y Sara tiene 3 hermanos. Es obvio que Raúl tiene menos hermanos que Sara. So Raúl is an only child and Sarah has 3 brothers. Es obvio, it's obvious that Raúl has less siblings than Sarah. Número 2. Tú estudias 2 horas al lunes, 3 al miércoles y 2 al viernes. Yo estudio 7 horas al sábado por la tarde. Yo estudio tantas horas que. Right, so no, tantas horas como. But I have to make sure that this says horas because everything has to agree with each other. Okay, so when I redo it in English, you study 2 hours on Monday, 3 on Wednesday, and 2 on Friday. I study 7 hours on Saturday in the afternoon. So I study tantas horas como tú. I study as many hours as you, right? Because once you add that up, 2 on Monday, 3 on Wednesday, and 2 on Friday equals 7. Again, it's understanding vocabulary in context, and so knowing your vocab is a huge part of this. Mi estudio es blank que el apartamento de Juan. Mi estudio es más pequeño. So this one you don't have as much context, right? My studio is smaller than Juan's apartment. So the reason I'm using más pequeño que, right, is that this already has K in it. So you'd be saying menor que K, right? So that just doesn't fit. Tanto pequeño que, tan and tanto are always used with como, right? It's never used with K. So your only option is más pequeño. Número 4. Raúl corre media hora cada día. Amelia corre media hora cada día. Raúl corre tanto como Amelia. So that what it's saying is that Raúl runs half an hour each day. Amelia runs half an hour each day or every day. So Raúl runs as much as Amelia. Número 5, yo tengo 3 gatos y tú tienes 5 gatos. I have 5 cats and I have 3 cats and you have 5 cats. You have más gatos que yo. You have more cats than I. So again, it's knowing vocab, knowing that 3 is less than 5, and so on. So hopefully this helped you guys out a little bit. Si tienes preguntas, por favor, mándame un email. Send me an email. Come visit me in mi oficina, and we'll work out some solutions for you. Okay? Que tenga buen día. Have a great day. Ciao.